Now, Jeremy, we know they have been talking about what to do to try to erase some of the memory, to try to move on here in Soame. And of course, one of the most obvious things is to get rid of 5 College Close, the house that the murderer Ian Huntley shared with Maxine Carr, and also a store shed quite nearby his house, known as the Hangar, where he'd hidden the shirts. Now, we understand that they will be razed to the ground, and perhaps there will be a memorial garden on the site of the old house there. They're still discussing that, but one thing is most important, and they say it's up to the parents of Holly and Jessica to make those decisions. Jeremy.
David, I think you were telling me a story yesterday of you being on the high street when we heard that the jury had come back yesterday for a brief time, and how you could sense that people were on such tenterhooks, the reaction to just the very fact that the jury had moved back into the court.
Yes, in fact, when we had heard that the jury had come back, or had been actually called in yesterday, one lady screamed, "It's my grandchild," and she ran up the street, and several other people, she was in tears, several other people came round to follow her, to comfort her. It's very, very tense. It has been over the last few days since the jury have been out. People have really been biting their nails and worrying about all the emotion. There's so much pent-up emotion here, and as I was saying earlier, it doesn't take much to push them over the edge, to get those tears welling up in their eyes, and that's just how they feel. But they think now that this has really brought some of the best out in people of Soame, and they are supporting each other. But most of all, they're thinking about those parents who, as one person put it to me today, are going through a living hell. They'll have to put up with inquiries and the questions of how and why. A lot more for them to go through, of course, Jeremy.
David, many thanks. Well, during those long, hot, very tense days in the late summer of 2002, cameras and correspondents like us from all around the world descended on Soame. I was one of them, of course, anchoring Sky News' coverage here. I spoke to many of the people most closely involved in the case, the parents, the police, the local people. And I also came face to face with Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley.
They seem fine, very cheerful, happy, chatty. You know, just seem like normal, happy kids.
Ian Huntley's seemingly innocuous words were to come back to haunt us all. The girls had been missing for 4 days when I first arrived in Soame, and you could already feel the growing anxiety and fear in this small country community. Gone were the friendly faces I'd remembered so well working here many years before as a trainee reporter on the Cambridge Evening News, covering the parish council and local football matches. By August 2002, Soame was a town in trauma. Police officers and those now familiar posters of Holly and Jessica in their red shirts were everywhere. Closed-circuit TV footage of the girls' last walk past the sports centre was released to jog fading memories. At that time, we all felt there was still some hope. 1 week on and things were looking pretty desperate though. The police investigation seemed to be stalling, so we tried to establish a detailed timeline of the girls' last movement, from the sports halls through the village college and here to College Close, and in particular we came to this house, number 5. We wanted to speak to the caretaker at the school, Ian Huntley, the last man to have seen the girls alive. Now today, his house is completely boarded up after over a year of detailed forensic work by the police behind those doors. But that day, Ian Huntley walked out of the front door past his red Fiesta, shook hands with me, and we had a chat. He seemed a slightly wary, troubled man. He had very dark rings under his eyes. But even then, I still had no suspicion at all that he was to be the killer. Ian Huntley here is a familiar figure. Evening, Ian.
No, JT's gone for a quick hit and miss.
Jessica and Holly would know you, and they saw you.
parents of Holly and Jessica, Leslie and Sharon Chapman, and Kevin and Nicola Wells coming in any time now. We've just been told by Hal Jarman, the Cambridgeshire Police press officer, that they are on their way here to talk to us, that they will give brief statements and then they will take questions for 10 minutes. And you can see now Gary Goose, the family liaison officer, coming in, followed by the families. We're expecting them to come in at any moment. And here you see Leslie Chapman, followed by his wife Sharon, and behind her Nicola Wells, Holly's mother, and Kevin Wells, her husband, Holly's father. They're taking their seats. Of course, these are the most important people for this case, and in particular today's verdict has been about. We wait for them to begin to speak to us here.
We'd just like to say a few thank yous first. Basically to the Homes team, the people of Soham. It goes without saying our FLOs. To all the family and to all the witnesses and to the media. Without their coverage, possibly couldn't have got the right result. If you want to say any more, Kevin.
Thank you, Les. I'm probably going to reiterate some of those thank yous, but we'd like to do just that. We have many people to thank from our community, our friends and family, extended and close, who have been there for us over the last 16 months. Certainly a more broader thank you to the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, to the media. A question we have been asked many times is the level of intrusion that we've had to experience over the last 16 months, and that has been minimal, so that's a big thank you very much to all of you guys.
Yeah.
Equally, we would also like to just extend that thanks to Cambridgeshire Constabulary a little further. We have some amazing family liaison officers who've been our link to the organisation throughout, and certainly they've made this particular journey a wee bit bearable. So here's an opportunity to at least extend a thank you to them in the most public fashion. The disadvantage now perhaps of offering thanks across this table with the way that my stomach feels at this moment in time is that I'm going to miss people out. So that will be the end of that for this moment. Thank you.
The other person I think we'd like to thank is Mr. Moses. Judge Moses. I think his speech caught us all on the hop, which went down, I think, remarkably well from the family's point of view. I think that's about it, really. I suppose it's over to you chaps now.
Kevin, BBC News, could I ask you what went through your mind when you heard the verdict delivered?
A great sense of relief. There was certainly no sense of euphoria, just a relief that we'd got to the end of that process. Thank you.
Rachel Lambert from Sky News. If I could ask Leslie and Sharon Chapman to answer this question. Despite everything you've been through the past 6 weeks of this case, you still don't know what happened to your daughters inside number 5 College Place. How does that leave you feeling?
There's only one man who can answer that question, and whether he has the guts to answer that question publicly is down to him. But the other people we should thank is the 12 jury members who've had to endure what we've had to endure, and without them we wouldn't have got the right result.
And what would it mean to you, feeling like you did finally choose to tell you what happened to your daughters, if I could ask you else that question?
Well, I don't think we'd give too much credibility to many sentences that he uttered, so we won't be looking for a defining answer from that area.
What do you feel towards Ian Huntley?
Did you ever have any doubts about the outcome of the trial?
So we've had doubts for 16 months to get a satisfactory conclusion. It's a new process for us to be involved in, and not until that verdict was announced today have we had a cessation of our fears.
James McKillop, the Herald Glasgow. What was your reaction when you heard of the previous history of Huntley?
So who was that question to?
James McKillop, the Herald.
I think it was a time bomb just ready to go off. And unfortunately, our girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I don't think there's any more need to be said about him. Except the only thing that I'd like to say is that the next time I have to see him is like we saw our daughters, and that's in a coffin.
Just further to that remark, Hawk Daily Express, in the light of your last remark, do you lament the fact that the legislature no longer provides for a death penalty?
At the moment.
Mr. Wells, Simon Israel from Channel 4 News. Do you intend to have an input into these inquiries that are to take place from today?
Yes, I think we have been given a passage where we can be actively kept up to date when the inquiry commences, and I feel that will be an area that we will be involved in, yes.
Well, nothing can bring, this is John Snow from Channel 4 News, nothing obviously can ever make amends for what has happened to you, but is there any memorial, fitting memorial you feel that could be left for your daughters that would bring you some comfort? And what would it be?
Well, we haven't really thought about that yet, but I'm sure at some stage we will consider and think about what we really want.
And is there an aspect of the law that you would like to see changed?
Well, we hope that perhaps the inquiry will bring some legislative changes that may benefit other families, and certainly make sure that no one has to endure the 16 months that we have had to endure, both families, under the present environment.
Mr. Wells, from John Stewart again, from what you've gathered, what's your view of the way in which various agencies and authorities seem to have failed to come together with the evidence they had about Huntley, and thereby perhaps arguably prevent him taking that job in the first place?
Yes, well, it impacted very negatively on us, of course, when we were told a few weeks ago about the up-to-date position. Equally, we've had the trials and tribulations over the last 6 weeks to focus our minds on. Those areas we will give some further thought to, and will work alongside the inquiry, and hopefully we can have a positive impact and a contribution to make.
Obviously her killer has been brought to justice, but how will you remember your daughter?
Loud, noisy, and a real tomboy. And that's it, really.
Same question as you, Nicola Wells. You were shopping with her the day before. Your last memories of Holly?
Happy, no worries, just enjoying life, and just always happy, always smiling.
It's rare to hear somebody in your position actually praise the media, and I just wondered if I could ask you more specifically about what you said, about without the media you felt possibly you would not have got today's result. What did you mean by that? Did you mean that perhaps the media were responsible in the end for bringing Huntley to justice?
No, just the tapes that were shown in court. Without those tapes, that might have swayed the jury, might not have swayed the jury, but at least it was evidence that was there.
John Tristan from the newspaper. Can I ask both families what you think about the level of support you've been shown by the people of Soham throughout the 16 months?
Amazing.
Very good.
Yes, no complaints in that environment, of course.
During the court period, we heard Howie and Huntley approached you at one point when your daughters were missing. It must be impossible for you to believe that he was able to do that.
Well, at the time, as I gave very clearly in my plea statement, I really felt he was like many others who were offering words of support and comfort. So, of course, it wasn't until proceedings became active that we realised that it was a deliberate, intended gesture to promote one's or his own position. So, yes, I look at it differently now, but certainly I won't be reflecting on it too deeply.
And did his sheer callousness in court, coming up with these stories that the jury completely dismissed, surprise you? Did you expect him to make up this type of story?
I think it was a surprise, yes. Already there's been some statements outside the Old Bailey today indicating that he was backed into a position and then offered some form of explanation to represent his position. We felt that to be accurate and fair, and it was very difficult to see a system in place which allowed that 11th hour kind of last-ditch attempt. The law clearly states beyond reasonable doubt, and that, thank goodness, was judged to be so by 11 out of the 12.
You've been praised in court, all of you, for your bravery and the way you've carried yourself throughout this trial. It must have been an impossibly hard thing to maintain that composure throughout.
Very.
Mr. Wells, Mr. Chapman, Andy Tide, ABC News 24. How angry do you feel that more was not done to prevent this man from getting a job in which he was in constant, close contact with children like your late daughters?
It's like everything, you're always wiser after the event, which the authorities all are now. Procedures are going to be put in place, I believe, from this inquiry, so who knows?
But he was well known to the authorities in the north of England. Could not more have been done in terms of passing on information?
He didn't have a conviction. He couldn't do anything else.
Mr. Wells again. What are your, John Soberlin again, what are your immediate plans for the near future, you and your family?
Yes, we're going to take a short holiday break, and we'll regather our thoughts and focus on our son, and then we can return accordingly.
Just one more question, just to go back to what we were saying about your composure. How have you managed to stay so strong throughout the past 16 months, and in particular the past 6 weeks?
I don't know. I couldn't answer. I don't know. You know, just don't know.
Well, I don't think the alternatives are great, so just a matter of getting through each and every day.
I don't think we had a lot of choice in the matter, did we?
That man's changed everything. I refuse to let him win on this.
I mean, our life sentence started last August. His is only just beginning.
No.
And there you see the families of Holly and Jessica Chapman, Leslie and Sharon Chapman, Nicola and Kevin Wells leaving the room there, going back to their homes in Surrey. And as you heard Kevin Wells say there, their first plan to look after their other children and also to take a brief holiday, and some very strong sentiments expressed, as you would expect, by the family. In particular, Kevin Wells saying the fact that Ian Huntley made up these numerous stories during the trial, the fact he was able to do so at the very last minute, just before the trial started. He said he felt that was something that they were very unhappy about, something they would much rather not have had to sit through. Asked how they maintained their composure, well, you heard the answer from them. They simply didn't know. As Kevin Wells said, the alternatives weren't great. And as Jessica Chapman's mother, Sharon, said so strongly there, they didn't want to let Ian Huntley win. They couldn't let him win again. And we heard very movingly there as well from Leslie Chapman. He said Ian Huntley's life sentence began today, but for the parents, for both families, their life sentence began on August the 4th last year when their 2 daughters went missing.
Rachel, I thought it was interesting at the end that the journalists in that room actually gave them a round of applause as the parents stood up and left the room. It does say a lot about the relationship that's built up over the last 14 months, doesn't it?
Very much so, Jeremy. I've never seen that happen before, but it was the reaction you wanted to give once you saw them walk out of here. They have been incredibly brave. It was something that Mr. Justice Moses paid tribute to. He praised their composure, their dignity in the courtroom, and also the police, the chief inspector in charge of this case, Chris Stevenson. He said he wanted to praise their patience, their dignity, their fortitude. It's something we've seen throughout the past 6 weeks of this case. It's something we saw at the time when the girls went missing. And yes, You did hear those words from Jessica's father praising the media. He was asked a little bit more about that because it is so unusual to hear, and he said the fact that everybody stayed with the story helped keep up public awareness, helped bring witnesses forward in this case. And they said too that although they've had to put up with a fair amount of intrusion over the past 16 months, they feel that that has been minimised. But you can only feel the greatest of admiration for these 4 people who've waited over 16 months and 13 days to get justice for their daughters, and nothing can bring those girls back at all, and nothing can lessen their grief, but they have at least got the verdict that's made the past 6 weeks here at the Old Bailey worthwhile for them.
Rachel Ammott at the news conference there with the parents, the Wells and the Chapman family. Thank you very much. Well, here in Surrey with me is the Reverend Alan Ashton, the local Methodist minister here in Surrey. It was interesting, you didn't hear all that because it was away in London and couldn't hear down the line, but the journalists gave them a round of applause at the end.
That part, yeah.
Everybody was talking about their fortitude. How did you manage to keep your composure up? And they said, well, we had to. We weren't going to let this man beat us. We weren't going to let him win at the end of it. You've obviously found that strength that's come out in these
Yes,
families.
certainly. I mean, a strong determination that they're going to be throughout all the process. I think for the sake of their children. I mean, I felt at the end of the conference the fact that what are sometimes called hardened journalists actually applauded the family. That says a tremendous amount about the respect that people have for the families of Holly and Jessica, and the great courage that they've shown inwardly, going through immense, unimaginable torture, I imagine, but they've done remarkably well.
Well, even for a churchman like yourself, you must be surprised that people seem to sort of drag up this extraordinary inner strength and cope with something as momentous and as awful as this.
Well, yes, I mean, it is surprising on the one hand, but then it just shows the depth of people's personality and commitment, and the fact that just on a basic human level, people have been able to respond to this wickedness, which I think the police have described the crime as being, in the manner that the families of Holly and Jessica have responded, and the community itself in supporting them.
And good, strong families around here.
Yes, very much so.
What clearly comes through at the end of this is that even at the end of this trial, and a man has been sent down for murder, everybody knows that he's killed these 2 girls, but still so many of the facts remain a secret, unless he, as Les Chapman said there, unless only one man can answer the question whether he has the guts to tell us remains to be seen. It's always going to be a problem for the Wells and Chapman families not knowing those final minutes, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, there's an emptiness about it, and human nature often wants to fill in the gaps. And I think one of the huge lessons for the families and for the community is that there may always be gaps in the story of Holly and Jessica, and coping with the unknown is enormously difficult to do.
On one hand, there's sort of forgiveness and the need to try and get over this and move on. The other will be, of course, blame, and inevitably people want to point a finger and blame somebody for such an awful thing to happen. Is the inquiry that goes on into the vetting at the school, how the police conducted themselves, in a way, is that going to sort of keep the whole suffering lingering, do you think, or will it help to expunge the memories?
I think it could well do both. I mean, there was a hope before these revelations were made public that the end of the trial would see the end of the intense media interest. I think with the public inquiry announced by the Home Secretary, that's obviously not going to be the case. The name Soam is going to be heard, but perhaps it will have that dual effect of expunging at one and the same time.
At the moment, though, it's sort of, one hopes that there will at least be some sort of line drawn in the sand here, that the town will be able to start moving on and helping the family to get over it. It sounds, they were saying they're going away on a little holiday. They obviously need to put some distance between this and their futures.
Yes, I think they do. I mean, we have to accept the fact that every single day there have been members of the family present in court number 1, and that's an enormous strain for people generally. So the fact that they feel the need to move away from the situation, have a few days apart, will perhaps recharge the batteries, help them to centre their thoughts. But every day for the families is one of loss for the child that's been taken from them.
Difficult though, isn't it? Christmas time?
Yes, it is. It's enormously difficult. But I mean, Soam outwardly looks normal. as far as Christmas preparations are concerned. And so we'll be concentrating on the normality, in inverted commas, of the Christmas season, with the whole tragedy just under the surface.
Alan, thank you very much indeed, Reverend Alan Ashton. Again, giving us a feel of how the community is going to be reacting here. We're going to go straight across to the Old Bailey now and hear from Roy Jones, who's Maxine Carr's solicitor.
Okay, we're close still. All right. Miss Carr is relieved that for her the events of the last 16 months have now drawn to a close. She's thankful that the jury has recognised that she had no idea that Ian Huntley had murdered Holly and Jessica. She knows that everyone's thoughts will and should be with the families of the two girls. At the conclusion of her sentence, she would wish to put matters behind her and try to have as normal a life as is possible in all the circumstances. She's thankful for the support that she's received since her arrest. And that's it. Yes. She was tearful, but she was fine.
Does she have anything to say to Holly and Jessica's parents?
Only what I've said in my statement.
Has she taken on board the judge's point that if she truly had regard for those two girls, she would have told the truth earlier, and if she had told the truth earlier, Ian Huntley may have been arrested earlier?
I'm not sure whether that's factually correct, but she...
I can get the correct quote if you
Oh,
like.
I'm sure the judge has said that, but I'm not sure whether he would have been arrested any earlier. But she takes on board everything that he said. She made it clear in her evidence, her reasons why she lied, and I'm not in a position to go beyond what she said in her evidence.
Has she said anything about what she would like to do when she doesn't?
I'm not in a position to talk about what she's likely to do when she's released, I'm afraid.
You talk about her wanting to have as normal life as possible.
Yes, but...
Does she accept that she won't have a totally normal life?
She accepts it would be difficult, but other than that, I can't expand on that. I can't go into any more detail as to what she's likely to do, where she's likely to go.
Has she had any thoughts about it?
Yes. Yes, but I can't tell you.
When are you expecting her to court? Presumably she'll be out in just a few months' time.
You have to work the exact release date yourself, but it'll be towards the middle of May next year, I think. But I haven't sat down and worked out the exact release date yet.
Do you know what her thoughts are now about Ian Huntley?
I think her evidence made her thoughts very clear. Okay?
Excuse me, can I just ask you to repeat that statement?
All right, I'll repeat it.
That's Roy James, who's Maxine Carr's solicitor, just outlining, making a few points there about her reaction. He said that Maxine Carr was relieved and had no idea that Huntley was the murderer. Let's go straight across to a Cambridgeshire Police press conference in central London.
Working very long hours to support this inquiry. I thank them and I thank the national organisations and also those experts outside the police service, forensic experts and retired officers who have lent their expertise to make this a successful investigation. I'd like to thank Richard Latham, QC, and the prosecution team. I think they did an excellent job in prosecuting Huntley and Carr to a successful conclusion. I'd like also to thank the Crown Prosecution Service. Marion Bastin and her team have worked with us from the very beginning of this case, and I think that's really good evidence of a strong working relationship that has brought us to this point where we're now considering Huntley in my view, a cold, calculating and cunning criminal who has been caught and has been put behind bars for the rest of his life. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them now.
If I could ask you what you would say in your defence on the fact that Surrey Village College played everything by the book and yet Ian Huntley still managed to get a job as a school caretaker despite an appalling list of complaints against him. Why didn't that come up?
Well, I think we're all aware that the Home Secretary has announced an inquiry into the issues surrounding the vetting of Huntley as he sought the job at Surrey Village College, and also into the history of his alleged behaviour in Humberside over recent years? Well, first of all, I want to say that during the course of the inquiry, we became aware of that history, and we became aware of the fact that the vetting procedure hadn't worked as we would have liked. I therefore welcome this inquiry, because I think what we should be doing now is focusing, as far as the vetting issues are concerned, is focusing on what can be done to improve things for the future. I am aware, of course, that there has been a change since the vetting took place, but I very much support what the Home Secretary is saying about let's have a look at this, let's have an independent look at this, and let's do what we can to make sure that if there have been mistakes made, those mistakes don't happen again.
Mr. Lloyd, Andy Ty, BBC News 24. Inquiries take a long time, we know. What reassurance can you give people, as a senior police officer, that even in the interim, before the inquiry reports, that steps have been taken to make sure that something similar can't happen again? In other words, that the vetting procedure is as thorough as we should expect.
Well, I think it's fair to say that because an inquiry has been announced, we shouldn't conduct that inquiry here now. But of course you are aware that there is a new system that was put in place in March of 2002. Now, I don't know, and I think it would be wrong of me to say that any system is perfect, but what I can reassure you is that we will do all we can, and we have already cooperated with Her Majesty's Inspectorate and the Home Office by way of putting forward those issues that we've uncovered so that can help the inquiry.
Mr. Lloyd, Simon Israel from Channel 4 News. How do you feel about the fact that the HMIC and the Home Secretary announced today that part of this inquiry will also include how you conducted your own investigation in the initial stages?
Well, I feel quite comfortable with that. I and no colleague would say that there's ever been a perfect investigation. But what we did do, and I think it's important that everybody understands this, is that as soon as we started the investigation, we conducted an internal review. We then invited the Metropolitan Police Service to conduct a review. Now, normally that happens after 28 days, and we invited them and they started work after a fortnight. And this has been already recognised as good practice. We also worked with the National Crime and Operations faculty, and they conducted a critical incident debrief into the inquiry, and we also conducted our own thematic debrief. Now, all of that has produced a wealth of information, good practice, and also learning points for the constabulary and learning points for the organisation, the police service as a whole. Now, I think that's exactly the right way to go about this, and the HMI will work with us, Sir Ronnie Flanagan will work with us to look at the recommendations of, I think it should be all of those reviews, not just the Metropolitan Police Service review, so that we can use the knowledge that we've gained from this inquiry to the benefit of colleagues throughout the service. I think it's also worth saying that it is easy to look back in hindsight on an inquiry. It's easy to look back and say things could have been done differently, but sadly we know that we could not have saved those two little girls. And we also know that the criminal has been brought to justice.
One further question. Do you regret going on holiday when you did?
I was on holiday when this happened, and I kept in touch with my deputy at the time, Keith Hoddy. Now, I came back early, but I do appreciate that some people could have seen the fact that I stayed away as being insensitive. Now, I'm sorry if that's caused concern or upset.
Chief Constable, first few weeks of the case, a number of journalists said they went to the police because they felt that Ian Huntley had behaved suspiciously. He in fact broke down in front of one of your police officers and said, "You think I did it," and was told simply to pull himself together, not to persecute himself. Do you feel that his house should have been searched earlier, that he was hanging around, running rings around you, as the prosecution said?
What I do know, and we all know, is that Huntley was doing everything he could to avoid capture. Now, again, looking back in hindsight, it's easy to pick out selected bits of behaviour, selected parts of the evidence and say, "Ah, well, it's obvious you should have done it in that way." Just look at the case that was presented by Richard Latham and his colleagues at the court, and look at the amount of evidence that actually came as a result of Huntley being around in Soham at that time. Some of that evidence was brought to the court as a result of journalists interviewing him. That evidence proved to be overwhelming. What we need to look at here is the success of the prosecution.
Matthew Bailey, Daily Mail. So the constabulary is likely to come into some considerable criticism, I think, over the next 24 hours in terms of vetting and the investigation and so on. Are you considering your position?
No, I'm not.
Chief Constable, there will be those who will regard this as a rather complacent performance. You've said that the vetting procedure worked less well than you would have wished. It completely failed. You've also said, be satisfied with the success of the prosecution. The issue today is how successful was the policing? The policing surely in the end was saved by the media, in part. And the row at the time about the failing of the policing is what in and of itself generated the immediate need to bring in Scotland Yard. You have a very great deal to face here, do you not?
Well, I've already covered some of the matters that you've raised, but I think it's important that you understand that what people saw in the media during those first 2 weeks was not a true reflection of what was happening in the inquiry, and a great deal of effective police work was going on and resulted in the very early arrest of Huntley and Carr and the successful prosecution. Now, the Metropolitan Police Service were brought in to conduct a review, and that's all they did. They did not investigate this matter.
Sorry, Mr. Lloyd, Aidan McGurran from the Daily Mirror. One of the things that seems to have been raised is the huge quantity of information that had to be processed. Do you think there's any lessons to be learnt for a small rural force like yourself dealing with such a massive inquiry in light of what happened during Fincham?
Well, I referred to the tremendous support we got from colleagues all around the country, and we got that support very quickly, and that was very effective. My view is that this is not about the size of the organisation, because I believe that any organisation faced with the size and scale of this inquiry would have found it very difficult to have dealt with every piece of information that came in absolutely as soon as possible. As I've said, and I don't want to keep on repeating myself, this was a successful inquiry, but we of course have looked into all of those issues, and I think that there are opportunities for looking at how better we can handle that sort of flow of information in the future.
If I could put this question perhaps to Stevenson, who's been in charge of much of this investigation. One of the things that Jessica Chapman's father says was that Ian Huntley was the only person who knows what really happened to their daughters, if he has the guts to tell them. What will you be doing to try and get that information out of Ian Huntley?
Well, I think the dust has to settle after today's events, and then clearly we will maintain contact with his legal team, and we'll assess that as time progresses. I would love to have the opportunity to go and speak to him, as I said outside the court. I hope that at some time in the future he can see it in himself to tell everybody, for the sake of the families, exactly what happened.
More questions?
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
What was it like to deal with Ian Huntley? As we've heard him described as devious, calculating, all the rest of it. Professional detectives, great deal of experience. How did you find it?
Well, obviously my team have had the dealings with him, and that was very much limited to the time that he was in custody at Huntingdon, and simply because of the illness that he betrayed at that time, and the fact that the doctors deemed him unfit to be interviewed, that contact was kept to a relative minimum. So we would like the opportunity to interview him. We would have liked so at the time. It hasn't been made available to us, and therefore that contact has been relatively minor.
Is that all? In which case, thank you very much.
Well, there we are, Cambridgeshire Police with their latest news conference. This is the Haberdashers' Hall in central London there with, in the chair, the Chief Constable, Tom Lloyd, Cambridgeshire Chief Constable, who of course came in for some criticism at the time of the inquiry for being away on holiday and seemingly not rushing back, although his force clearly had a very major investigation on hand. He said he was sorry if people were offended or upset by that, but he'd kept in touch and on top of the investigation right the way through. He didn't feel that there was any reason for his force to be criticised for the way they conducted an inquiry in a style which had under arrest the man who was eventually convicted of murder after just 13 days. And interestingly, the man who ended up heading the detective side of the investigation, Chris Stevenson, said that he would still like a chance to talk to Ian Huntley to find out what really happened, and that they would be keeping in touch with the legal team of Ian Huntley in the hope that one day they would get the real and full story of what happened to Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Well, there's another police force also about to talk to the public at a press conference. There you can see the scene in Hull where Humberside Police Force is about to tell us their side of the story on this whole murder investigation. Alex Rossi is our reporter there, but that's the Chief Constable David Westwood. Let's hear what he has to say.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I first of all welcome you to BAE Systems. First and foremost, what I want to do is to express the sorrow that all of us feel for the parents, the relatives and the friends of Jessica and Holly. We feel their loss terrifically. I can tell you that I have personally discussed all of the issues that I'm going to talk to you about today with Mr. and Mrs. Wells and with Mr. and Mrs. Chapman. I've expressed to them the deep sorrow which I and all of my colleagues feel for those who loved Jessica and Holly. As the Chief Constable of Humberside Police, it's right that I represent the force and tell you what happened in this case. I shall later give you the opportunity to ask me questions about what Humberside Police knew of Ian Huntley and of Maxine Carr, and perhaps more importantly, what we did. First of all, in relation to Maxine Carr, Humberside Police knew little of her. At times, she lived in our police force area. She only came to our attention once, when she provided an alibi when Huntley was a suspect for an alleged rape. I will give you details of that later. Now, in respect of Ian Huntley, between 1995 and 1999, Huntley came into contact with my officers or came to their attention on 10 occasions. Some of the details that I'm going to give you now has information about some of the alleged victims of Huntley. Some of them are known to you, others are not. I do not intend to name people. It will be unfair, it will be unnecessary, and there are a number of legal reasons why I will not do so. I do, however, believe that it is genuinely in the public interest to reveal what occurred in each case. After Huntley was charged with the murder of Holly and Jessica, we realised he had lived in our area and been the subject of police investigation over a number of years. I determined that there was a need to revisit each and every case to ensure that evidence was re-examined in recognition of the inevitable public interest. Each of the alleged victims has been seen again and offered continued victim support. The case papers, where available, have been retrieved and re-examined by senior detectives. The investigations that were carried out at the time and the decisions made in respect of every case have all been reassessed. In each case, the investigations and the decisions made were in accordance with national policy and force guidelines. However, our investigations have identified some systems failings and elements of human error in our dealings with Huntley. This will be an entirely honest and open account of all our dealings with him. Our first involvement with Ian Huntley was in August 1995. Police were called to Huntley's address in North East Lincolnshire following the report of a domestic disturbance. Uniformed police officers attended the address, and whilst they were there dealing with the disturbance, the father of a 15-year-old girl made an allegation that his daughter had been having sexual intercourse with Huntley. The girl admitted this, but no complaint was ever received. A joint strategy decision was made to undertake a joint police and social services investigation. Officers interviewed Huntley, and the victim indicated to the officer that she did not want the matter to go any further. The case was recorded as complainant declines to prosecute, in accordance with the victim's wishes and the practice and policies in existence at that time. A review of this case has been undertaken, and the disposal of this incident in relation to action against Huntley was appropriate. The second contact was in November 1995, when he was aged 21. Huntley, together with another male, broke into a neighbour's house at Florence Street in Grimsby, stealing electrical goods and jewellery. Huntley's associate was arrested in respect of this matter and interviewed on tape and admitted the offence. In March 1996, Huntley was interviewed by police, admitted his part in the burglary, and was reported for summons. Huntley subsequently failed to turn up at court, and a warrant was issued. He was arrested on that warrant in February 1997 and eventually appeared before Grimsby Crown Court. The prosecuting lawyer, with leave from the judge, asked that the case lie on file. I move now to contact number 3. In April 1996, the mother of a 15-year-old girl brought her concerns about her daughter's sexual activity with Huntley to the attention of a local school in North East Lincolnshire. The school referred the matter to the social services. In turn, the matter was referred to Humberside Police in a telephone call in May 1996. The family was involved with the social services on a long-term voluntary basis. The girl refused to discuss the matter. The girl's mother refused to involve the police. Police and social services made a joint decision that the police would take no further action and the matter would continue to be dealt with by the social services. Now for contact number 4. This was an offence of unlawful sexual intercourse alleged against Huntley in May 1996. The victim in that case was a 13-year-old girl in North East Lincolnshire. All the normal procedures were followed and a referral made to the social services, and a joint strategy decision was made. When a joint police and social services investigation team interviewed the girl, she denied that any activities had taken place, and the girl's mother was also of the opinion that none had taken place. Both the mother and the alleged victim declined any medical examination, and no complaint was ever received. Huntley was not interviewed and the matter was not proceeded with, and the decision having been made by the police that there was no evidence that any offence had occurred. Now contact number 5. In March 1996, he was fined for not having a TV licence. He was arrested on warrant in February 1997 for non-payment of that fine, and at the same time he was arrested for failing to appear in respect of the earlier burglary offence. Contact number 6 was in April 1998. In this case, Huntley met an 18-year-old female in a nightclub in Grimsby. They shared a taxi together and went to the female's home address. Sexual intercourse took place. The next morning, the victim made an allegation of rape to her next-door neighbour. Huntley was arrested later that morning and he claimed consent. A medical examination was conducted on the victim and a statement was taken. Following an investigation, the police decided that there would be no proceedings on the basis that there was insufficient evidence. In May 1998, an 18-year-old woman was walking home alone from North East Lincolnshire nightclub in the early hours of the morning. The woman alleged that she was attacked in an isolated location and raped. Threats were made to kill her. Huntley voluntarily attended at the police station 4 days later and gave samples. He stated that consensual sex had taken place. Following a police review of the evidence available, a decision was made to charge him. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the case carefully, including evidence in CCTV footage that was obtained from a nightclub after the charge had taken place. In the light of this, they determined that along with other fresh evidence, the prosecution case was undermined. The CPS therefore determined that there was no realistic prospect of a conviction and discontinued the case. Now to contact number 8. In September 1997, a 12-year-old girl was playing in an orchard in North East Lincolnshire. The girl made an allegation in July 1998, some 10 months later, that she'd been assaulted in the orchard in September 1997 by a man called Ian, who committed a serious indecent assault against her. This was referred to the social services, and then the police became involved. Huntley was living in the same street as the victim at the time of the alleged offence, and he was arrested, but denied the offence. There was no forensic evidence, no witnesses, and no corroboration. The decision was made by the police not to proceed because there was insufficient evidence. And contact number 9 was in February 1999. A 17-year-old woman met Huntley and went to a Grimsby nightclub. The couple had previously met. The woman alleged that she and Huntley were alone at the end of the night and he forcibly raped her. The matter, however, was not reported to the police until the 22nd of May 1999. Huntley was seen and stated that the sex was consensual. The matter wasn't proceeded with because there was insufficient evidence and inconsistent evidence. That was a decision taken by the police. Contact number 10 was in July 1999. This is when a 17-year-old woman from North East Lincolnshire had been drinking in a Grimsby nightclub. She was walked home by somebody she called Jason. On the way home, she was allegedly raped. She ran home and reported the fact to her mother. Huntley became a suspect because of his previous alleged behaviour, reported in May 1999, and provided a sample for DNA analysis. Huntley at that time started to use the name Nixon. When Huntley was interviewed by us, he did indicate that he was using both names. We did not make a note of his alias on our records. That was a simple human error. An alibi was provided for Huntley by Maxine Carr. There was no evidence to suggest that Huntley was responsible, and the police decided not to proceed. Following Huntley's arrest in the Soham case, this victim was again spoken to by investigators, and she stated that Huntley, who she had seen on a number of occasions on the television, was not her attacker. The case remains undetected, despite an extensive investigation and local media attention. So those are the details of our contacts with Ian Huntley. I now want to turn to our intelligence systems. When we started to review our cases, following Huntley being charged with the murders of Holly and Jessica, we examined the computer system that we used to record criminal intelligence. This system has operated throughout the time that we've had our dealings with Huntley. We identified two weaknesses in our systems. The first was that vetting checks were only made on the main criminal intelligence database. Now, all relevant databases are checked, and new technology linking all of our systems is on the way. The second weakness is around the Data Protection Act 1984. Under the Act, information cannot be retained solely for the purposes of employment vetting. It can only be retained for a policing purpose. To do so would be a breach of the Act. We therefore have to weed our systems on a regular basis. Details about our contacts with Huntley were deleted from the system in accordance with the policy. It was designed in this way as a genuine attempt to comply with both the letter and the spirit of the Data Protection Act. It's now apparent that this makes it much more difficult to identify individuals who are subject to unproven allegations over a period of years. We now have in place a policy that enables us to retain intelligence in compliance with current understandings of the data protection legislation. However, the fundamental issue remains, and that is that the Information Commissioner does not consider employment vetting a policing purpose under the Data Protection Act. I now want to turn to the vetting issues surrounding Huntley. In about 1999, Huntley began to use the alias Nixon. There was the occasion in 1999 when Huntley was interviewed by us and did indicate that he was using both names. We didn't make a note of his alias in our records. This was a simple human error, and intelligence managers have been briefed to prevent this happening again. In October 1999, an Ian Nixon applied to Humberside Police for subject access, as he was entitled to do under the Data Protection Act, to learn if we held any convictions against him on the police national computer. He disclosed in his application form that he also used the name Huntley. There was in fact one entry on the police national computer against Ian Huntley, and that was in relation to the alleged burglary which the Crown Court had said should be allowed to lie on file. In the normal course of events, the application for subject access was sent to the National Identification Service. It appears that they only searched the name Nixon in accordance with the practice existing at that time. No connection was therefore made between Ian Nixon and the Ian Huntley who did have an entry on the police national computer. Had the two names been cross-referenced, then such information would have been available to all police forces throughout the United Kingdom. And we must remember that Huntley had never been cautioned for or convicted of any offence. Now, the relevance of these matters becomes clear when I tell you that Huntley applied for his post as school caretaker at Soham Village College in December 2001. We understand from Cambridgeshire Police that the vetting request received by them gave both names, namely Huntley and Nixon. Under the system then in operation, it was the responsibility of Cambridgeshire Police to check the police national computer. It appears that Cambridgeshire Police only checked the PNC against the name Nixon. They would have found no trace. We have no way of knowing for certain whether or not Cambridgeshire Police asked us to check our criminal intelligence system against either name. At that time, no records of such requests were kept. What we do know from the audit of our criminal intelligence system is that no checks were made by our staff against the record of Huntley, and we have no record of a Nixon, therefore there is no audit trail available on the computers. In any case, at the time of the Cambridgeshire vetting check, there was nothing recorded on our intelligence system about Huntley over and above that available on the PNC. This was due to the weeding policy in operation to ensure compliance with the Data Protection Act. We have learned from the past and will ensure that we do everything within our power permitted by law to retain relevant intelligence about those who may pose a threat to others. We've examined our involvement in this case in the minutest detail, and we've addressed every aspect of our performance and, where necessary, have adjusted and improved our work practices. However, the fundamental fact remains that Ian Huntley had not previously been cautioned for or convicted of any offence. I've been informed by the Office of the Information Commissioner that the Data Protection Act prohibits the retention of unproven allegations for the purpose of employment vetting. I've taken this issue up with the Office of the Information Commissioner. They acknowledge the issues raised in this case. They've agreed to work with the police to develop national guidelines refining criminal record checks on people working with children and vulnerable adults, and to consider whether any changes in the law are needed in this area. I want to avoid too many what-if questions today. I want to answer questions on known fact. I'm now prepared to take questions from the floor.
Alex Rossi, Sky News. Do you, Humberside Police, accept that Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman may still be alive today? Had you done your job properly?
We've looked at each of the allegations made against Ian Huntley. Each one has been properly investigated. We've had senior detectives check each one. The information was not on the computer due to our weeding policies under the Data Protection Act. We have been informed by the Information Commissioner that the Data Protection Act does not allow the retention of information solely for employment vetting. The Association of Chief Police Officers has issued a press release today, which I will give you the information from. And it's this: there are differing interpretations of what is required by different agencies. What we face here is the contradictory nature of two public policies. The first policy is in relation to the Data Protection Act, which requires the removal of information held on individuals. The second public policy is in relation to the retention of information to protect vulnerable people. There is no national guidance on this, either from the government or from the Information Commissioner. It's urgently needed.
The truth is, though, that Cambridgeshire Police and through them Solent Village College asked you if this man was safe to work with children. He clearly wasn't, and you told them that he was.
I have no information what we were asked from Cambridgeshire Police. The vetting checks are asking what is on our systems. What was on our systems was what we believed would be right under the data protection legislation. We carried out that vetting check we carry out vetting checks in relation to what we believe to be right.
Yeah, but your system clearly was a total shambles in that it didn't allow your officers making those vetting checks to see all of these contacts you'd had with them over the last 7 or so years.
I will come back to the point that I made before. There are two different public policies operating here. The first public policy is the requirement to remove information from computer systems. This is under the Data Protection Act. The second public policy is to keep information on systems, which is to enable vetting. There is no national guidance how these two contradictory policies are to be reconciled. There is an urgent need for national guidance which has to come from both the government and the Information Commissioner on how this can be resolved.
Chief Constable, isn't it simple?
One at a time, please. One at a time, please. Excuse me. Would you? Excuse me. I will answer questions. Please be civil. Do not shout. Can I help you?
Chief Constable, isn't it the case that you have changed your policy in relation to the Data Protection Act? So it is rather disingenuous of you to stand there and imply that the whole thing is just a confusion over different forms of guidance. You have now been given new guidance, you have changed your policy, and you now have a criminal intelligence system, when it is evident you didn't have a criminal intelligence system worthy of the name.
No, that isn't the case. What we have done is change the way that we assess when we delete information.
So you've changed the policy?
No, we have not changed the policy. We have changed the way at the time at which we assess it. I think it's appropriate to make sure that all this information goes into the inquiry that the government has set up. Can I say that I welcome the inquiry because it is important that all these issues are properly, dispassionately and fully revealed so that a proper decision can be made about the way forward in the future.
Chief Constable,
can I help you?
5 News. You said that the information can't be kept solely for employment purposes, but you obviously use the information to track down Ian Huntley for some of the other rape suspect cases. So for that reason, why was it wiped if we were using it to track down suspects?
I can tell you it wasn't. It was the knowledge of an individual officer in relation to the second case.
Chief Constable, how do you know all this about Ian Huntley now, and yet you're saying that these files on Ian Huntley were deleted because you're trying to compile the
Yes.
checking out?
The investigation that's been carried out by my senior detectives has taken months to do. It has required us to go through thousands of records, thousands of paper records stored in basements around the force. It is our view that this ought to be available for vetting purposes on our computers.
Why wasn't that done at the
Chief
time?
Constable,
Excuse me, can I help you?
Channel 4 News, point of information or clarification. You had 3 allegations of underage sex in the space of 1 year, 96, 2 allegations of rape in the space of 1 year, 98, 2 allegations in the space of rape in the following year, 99. How often did you weed out information for this information to have gone so quickly and for no police officer, therefore, to be able to see that there was a pattern and therefore within the Data Protection Act you could have retained that information on the basis of a policing matter? It's with the benefit of hindsight and taking a list, it's very easy to come to a conclusion about what might be right now. In every single individual case, it was properly, fully and completely investigated. Huntley was never cautioned and never convicted. The weeding policy was in accordance with what was believed to be right under the Data Protection Act. How often did that process take place then? Every year, every 6 months?
Information is weeded when it comes forward for consideration. In the first instance, we had a monthly weeding policy for information that was not for a policing purpose. Everything for a policing purpose is actually weeded in accordance with the data protection legislation. So in other words, the fact that these were unproven allegations meant that they were deleted from the system because that was believed, and I have to tell you
Great value bells this Christmas.
It's great to be able to do several things at once.
Unproven allegations, were they? They were ones where families had decided not to take the case further, or the 15-year-old girl that Ian Huntley had sex with didn't want to take the case further. And that's not exactly the same as you deciding that he didn't do it.
the rules under which these are done are actually published on behalf of the Association of Chief Police Officers, and they refer only to cautions and convictions. They are completely silent on unproven allegations. This is the issue that has caused concern, and still causes me concern, because there is a clear contradiction between the needs of Data Protection Act to remove unproven allegations and the needs of the protection of the vulnerable to retain it. This is an issue where there is no national guidance, and it's an issue that must be resolved.
Chief Constable,
Can I help you?
Whose policy was...
Can you say who you are, please?
Tim Rogers from ITV News.
Thank you.
Can you tell us whose decision it was within the force about how the Data Protection Act, as you saw it, should be enforced? Who carries account for that?
In terms of Humberside Police, I'm responsible for Humberside Police.
Were you able to tell us in the way that you interpreted that legislation?
In terms of the Data Protection Act, I can't tell you what happened in 1984 when the Act came in. I have no record. We have looked for them, but I have no records.
But you were certainly in charge when some of these crimes were being, or these alleged incidents were being committed. Do you feel now personally responsible for what happened and in the way that this Act was interpreted?
We've looked at where Humberside Police is responsible, and as far as that's concerned, we had some systems weaknesses. As I've pointed out, we had a proliferation of databases happening. We've dealt with that and put that right. We also had an issue where information coming in for, excuse me, we also have the situation where information coming in to the vetting office was not then checked for the possibility of there having intelligence information on it, and that's been checked and fixed too. However, as far as the policies and practices in place, they were the understanding, and still are, the understanding of the policies and practices under the Data Protection
The point
Act.
I'm trying to make is that you were responsible for the procedure about when to wipe or not, were you not?
I am accountable for for Humberside Police.
Does that not make your position now untenable?
As far as my position is concerned, that's not a matter for me. As far as the performance of Humberside Police is concerned, I can tell you that
Details known to Humberside Police, but not acted upon.
When he arrived, the new school caretaker seemed a decent type, with an unblemished past and a stable girlfriend. But back in Grimsby, Huntley's hometown, it was a very different story.
Now, a trawl through back copies of the local paper reveals that Ian Huntley was not what he seemed. This is May 18th, 1998, girl in rape horror. A Grimsby girl was attacked and raped in an isolated alley after a night out with friends. Now, just 4 days later, man faces rape charge. Ian Kevin Huntley, 24, of Veal Street, Grimsby, was arrested after an alleged incident in Gas Alley.
And there was much more to Huntley's past. In 1995, police investigated claims he was having sex with a 15-year-old. No action was taken. In March 1996, he was charged with burglary. The case collapsed. And in March, April and May, social services looked into 3 more claims he was having sex with underage girls. No action was taken against Huntley. In 1998, 2 women came forward to say he had raped them. Both cases were dropped. And an 11-year-old said Huntley had indecently assaulted her. Once more, there was no action against him. And in 1999, yet another accusation of rape. Again, police concluded there was not enough evidence. So apart from the rape in this alley and the burglary, Huntley had got away without even being charged and with no convictions. The authorities seemed to be organisations without memory. There were 5 separate complaints about Huntley having sex with or abusing young girls on social services files. Not once did council staff link these cases together.
Is it possible, I mean just possible, that if some connection had been made by your staff, that Huntley might have been stopped earlier than he was?
You've got to remember, Huntley was never convicted of any crime. And clearly there were investigations into alleged crime that Huntley was involved with, but there were decisions that were taken not to proceed with those cases for various reasons. Those were decisions that the police took.
So here we have a man living in this one town who's been accused of rape by 3 separate women, and who on numerous occasions has been accused of having sex with underage girls. He is clearly a menace. So how on earth was he appointed as a school caretaker?
This is his application for the SOAM job. Note that he's changed his name to Ian Nixon. But like anyone wanting to work with children, he also had to fill in a police checks form. And on this, he did admit his previous surname was Huntley. The form was sent here to Cambridgeshire Police. Their job was first to check the police national computer. But they only checked under the name Nixon. They did not check under Huntley. If they had, the burglary charge held on file would have appeared. The head teacher at Soham Village College who took on Ian Huntley is clear. If he'd been told what was on the national computer, it would have made a difference.
Had Cambridgeshire Police told you that there was a burglary charge on file for Ian Huntley, what would you have done?
He'd have been dismissed.
There'd be no doubt at all about that, for a variety of reasons. First of all, any staff would be looked at very carefully with that information. But we're talking here about a member of staff whose first line in his job description is site security, and it'd be untenable to expect him to therefore fulfil that role, or for me to have trust and confidence in him doing that role with that information.
So in August 2002, when Jessica and Holly were killed, he wouldn't have been the caretaker here?
No, he wouldn't have been.
But there was another stage in this checking process. Cambridgeshire Police sent Huntley's details to his home force in Humberside. There they should have had records of all the investigations in Grimsby that did not lead to convictions.
Humberside Police had a vast amount of intelligence on Huntley. He should have been the last person in the world to be allowed to work with children. But hard though it is to believe, they gave him the all clear.
For their checks, Humberside Police believed they were only sent the name Nixon, but that shouldn't have mattered. I understand that on 2 occasions Humberside officers were told Huntley and Nixon were one and the same. They failed to record this in their intelligence files. And their whole criminal intelligence system was flawed. Vital information was routinely thrown away, so Humberside officers interviewing Huntley didn't know about his past. And even more incredible, staff vetting job applications did not have access to information about sex offences and children. The system was a sham. The Cambridgeshire officer responsible for bringing Huntley to justice says all the failures must now be addressed.
Well, clearly the system hasn't worked. I don't think there's any point in hiding behind that fact. I think there needs to be some form of inquiry into exactly how it did happen. And I understand that the Home Office are in fact instigating an inquiry.
Back at the Serm Secondary School, how does the head teacher who employed Huntley feel now about the failure of the police checks?
Deeply dismayed at hearing it, that a man with that sort of background was put in a position of trust by me, and was mixing with our children and the staff, and that there was no indication of I couldn't express just how dismayed. I feel physically sick actually to think that was the background of a man that was appointed here.
The checks failed. It gave this man a position of trust with children. It was a catastrophic error with tragic results. Neil Dixon, BBC News.
Well, joining me in the studio is retired Assistant Chief Constable Tony Rogers, who's been working alongside Cambridgeshire Police as a homicide consultant on this case. Tell me about what your role was.
My role was that of advisor and mentor to the Senior Investigating Officer, Chris Stevenson, and to the Chief Officer team. And that started about day 12 and continues to today.
When did you get the feeling that Huntley was your person?
Well, from the beginnings of this investigation, there were a number of people of interest to the team for all sorts of reasons, and Huntley was one of them. But it became more likely to move towards Huntley when we started to get some information about the use of the girl's mobile phone. Until about day 12, we were given the information that the phone was used 2 miles away in a village, or it could have been used lastly at the girl's home. So there was some conflict there. But on about day 12, we were told the phone was actually turned off in the location of Huntley's house. So he, along with others, were of significance to us, and we undertook an investigation action plan to bring him right to the forefront of the investigation.
What does that mean, an action plan?
Well, with people that come to notice of the investigation, we have to decide where they fit and what we're going to do. And it's important to remember that in an investigation of this size, you will have a significant number of individuals that are of interest, and we have to run the investigation on a broad front. So it's important that we actually record what we're going to do, with who, what the significant issues are with each individual, and analyse that as we go through.
How complex was the whole operation when you first brought him in? Because on the Friday night, I think you brought him in and Maxine Carr, and then you let them go again. Now, what was going on? What was the thinking there?
Well, we'd already arrested an individual which looked of great interest to the investigation, and he'd been released. So we were working through those that were of interest. And what Chris Stevenson and the team decided to do on the Friday was to invite Huntley and Carr in, put them into two separate police stations and interview them on video so that we could match their accounts of where they were at significant times.
Do you get a feeling as a policeman, in your bones, in your blood, that, yeah, we've got the people responsible?
Yeah, you do, and certainly that feeling was about with those two at the time. And whilst they were in the police stations being interviewed, we gained their permission to search their homes and their vehicles, and told them that this would take a number of days, and we were going to conduct a fingertip search of all their belongings, etc. So they were allowed to go when they'd finished their statement, and within about an hour or so from letting them go, we had a significant find of the girls' clothing in the hangar at the school.
And what was Huntley's demeanour like throughout this?
Huntley at that time was very confident. He was not only a caretaker, but he was a manager of other caretakers, so he was a man that knew what he wanted to do, and he was quite sure of himself and quite plausible, as was she at that time.
Yeah, fascinating. We'll come back to more of this. Tony, for the moment, thanks very much indeed.
We can go live to Soham in Cambridgeshire. Our colleague Chris Seacon joins us there live from there. Chris.
Yes, Maxine, of course there's been a nervous wait for the verdict here, and while that does mean that to a certain extent people can now move on, it does also mean though that they now have to face up to all the revelations which are coming out, and the political debate, of course, which you've been talking about earlier today, into those revelations which Neil Dixon has been talking about and Daniel Sanford in Grimsby. Well, I have with me the local Conservative MP James Pace, who is also the Shadow Minister for the Police. Good afternoon to you. What do you make of the revelations? I know you personally have known about them for some time, but of course most people have not.
No, I think my constituents will be in a huge state of shock when they realise there's this long list of allegations and one charge against Huntley in the past, and how on earth it didn't come out in the vetting process, which is why I very much welcome the Home Secretary's announcement of an inquiry to get to the bottom of what went wrong in that process.
And that, of course, is the problem with this, that while he hadn't actually been found guilty of his relationships, the allegations of underage girls, they were all independent allegations.
That's right.
His rape allegations were with 3 different women, all independent of each other. He clearly, when you put it all together, as Neil Dixon's been saying, there was a major problem, and he would not have got the job. That must be very difficult for people here to live with.
Well, of course it's going to be very difficult, and there is going to be huge anger in this town as all this is coming out today and over the next few days. Of course that's going to be the case, but we can't undo it. We've got to learn from it, and which is why the inquiry is so essential, to find out what went wrong, why it is that apparently Humberside Police didn't pass on information, something to do, we understand, with data protection. They may have even erased records, we're told, because of data protection legislation. If that is the case, we want to know what's wrong with the legislation, or did they just misunderstand it? And find out why it is that Cambridgeshire Police, who asked them for information, whether they didn't ask all the right questions and whether they didn't get the right answers. That's what the inquiry is for. We can't second guess that at this stage.
That inquiry being the independent inquiry, which David Blunkett has announced. Now, you are, as I say, local MP, but also Shadow Minister for the Police. Are you satisfied with David Blunkett's calling of that independent inquiry? Does that go far enough?
Yes, I am, and I have no intention of trying to make any politics out of this at all, whatever people may try and do. We wanted an inquiry. I understand the reasons why it's not a judicial one. They wanted to do it more quickly. Sir Michael Bishard was a very prominent senior civil servant. I in fact worked with him when I was a government minister myself, and I have a huge respect for him. I believe he will get to the bottom of this, so I'm quite happy with what's being proposed.
But again, you talk there about political capital and so on, quite rightly, of course, but this is where it becomes so difficult for Soham. We're about to look at Richard Bilton's report into the impact on this town.
Yes.
This last few days has been such an anxious, nervous time, because everybody's thought that now, when you get the verdicts, that's it, Soham can move on. Yes, the name becomes synonymous with tragedy, like Hungerford, like Dunblane, but you can move on. And yet here we have to have an inquiry. It doesn't finish.
Of course it's not over, and of course we have to have that inquiry, and indeed the other one that's going on, the report by the inspector into how the Inspector of Constabulary, into how Cambridgeshire Police actually carried out the investigation. That too is going to take place in the coming weeks. Both are very, very important, and yes, they will, if you like, delay the recovery process for Soham, but they are equally essential. They have to be done.
And for Holly and Jessica's families.
Well, there is nothing that any of us can say for Holly and Jessica's families that can begin to undo the tragedy and the trauma of the last 18 months, and I think we just all have to take that as read. They're in the hearts of all of us, not just this community but the whole country, over what they've gone through, and I should say the immense dignity they've shown during the trial. I don't think I as a parent could have possibly sat through the trial as they have, and they deserve our love and respect for doing so.
Indeed. Well, James Pace, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Yes, indeed, we understand that the two families will take something of a break from here, of course, before then carrying on with life as normal. We talked about how the inquiry will have an impact. Indeed, that's in a way it's illustrated that the problems of people trying to carry on as normal is illustrated by the media presence here, which is very deliberately an entire field away from the church. The church, St Andrew's Church, is very much at the heart of this town, physically at the heart of it, just off the high street, and you can see the whole media village there, the satellite vans and so on. Here, with the agreement of the vicar at the church and other community leaders, they formed a group called the Gold Group to liaise with people, and this move on the camera demonstrates the extent to which this tragedy unfolded so close to the centre of the town. This is the college, and nestled in the trees out of sight is the actual school caretaker's building, Ian Huntley's building, where Holly and Jessica died, a building which has to stand because it's a court exhibit, although they hope to be able to demolish that soon. They'll be listening out for whether there could be an appeal, perhaps having an impact on that. So the church itself is, as I say, just off the high street there, the church clock. It's a very grand building in this Fenland market town, a population of 9,000 people here. This live shot gives us an indication of the high street here. This is the high street now in Soham. There is deliberately a very low-key media presence. Two broadcasting organisations, including us, having just single cameras there in this position, which is in fact only 100 yards or so, a couple of hundred yards or so from where we're standing across the field. All of this is an attempt for everybody to work together and for the people of Soham to carry on as much as possible as normal. Now, Richard Bilton has been reporting and indeed has been looking at the caretaker's house and how that's been dealt with, trying to screen it from people. We've also been talking to people about how the families have to, the people of Soham rather, have to deal with not deserting the families, wanting to be loyal to the families of Holly and Jessica while trying to move on. Now, Richard Bilton reports on the impact all of this has had on what is a small market town.
It's only a small town, a community of 9,000, but the people of Soham carry an enormous burden.
We're going to ask you to cover your own areas first.
Everything changed here the day the girls disappeared. The world watched the desperate search, watched as hope slipped away. Jessica and Holly never did come back, and the man who killed them was from the heart of this community. Even now, opposite the school, boxed in metal sheeting, sits a terrible reminder of what happened here. Behind this metal fence is the house in which Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr lived, and we now know Jessica Chapman and Holly Wells died. And for some here in Soham, the horror of what happened here 2 summers ago has been relived over the past few weeks and the trial. Tim Alban-Jones is Soham's vicar, and he says it's been a hard time, the town's slow recovery undermined by the terrible details.
I think we were doing really well. After last August, we began to move forward, and then the trial has brought us sharply to a halt and perhaps even back a little bit. It's been a difficult process of coming to terms with what's happened and all the knowledge that has emerged as a result of that trial.
And what of those who knew them? This is Holly on the left at the Carnival Parade the summer before she died. a close community of friends in the majorettes marching behind. And in that group, Charlene Moden was her best friend, now one of a generation of 10-year-olds in Soham, left with questions and fears.
It's made a big effect to me because when Holly and Jessica went off, they were 10, so it's been a big effect because I'm 10 now. It was just a real big shock to me because I couldn't believe that somebody could do that to children.
And children here are closely watched. What makes Soham unusual is the killer was part of the school community. It makes it hard for the students. It's devastating for Holly and Jessica's head teacher.
And after all that you've been through, what do you think of Ian Huntley?
I find it very difficult to come to terms with what I feel. The fact that somebody who works and lives within our community could do that is it's something that I'll never be able to explain to myself, never be able to explain to anybody else, and never quite be able to understand.
So as much as it can, Soham will move on. Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr's house is likely to be demolished, but the pain that exists here will not so easily be removed. Richard Bilton, BBC News, Soham.
Yes, Tim Malbon-Jones featuring in Richard Bilton's report there, the vicar, of course, of St Andrews, who we spoke to live shortly after the verdict. Just to mention the school, in fact, and in particular the caretaker's building with those strange screens protecting it, deliberately kept away from us here. We're deliberately away from the school at the request of the school governors. The caretaker's house is in the trees there, out of sight at the moment. From 5 o'clock onwards, the media organisations have been told that they can go over to the school once all the pupils have left, all part of everybody trying to work together here to minimise the impact on Soham. We shall be there at 5 o'clock, in fact. For now, back to John and Maxine.
Chris, thanks very much indeed.
Well, before coming to Soham, Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr lived in Grimsby. We can go there live now, and our correspondent, Judith Morris. Judith, good afternoon.
Yes, that's right. Good afternoon. They did live here. In fact, both Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley were born in this area, grew up here, went to schools here locally, and lived here together in a variety of different places before moving on to Soham. And this area is also where Ian Huntley is said to have committed those other offences of rape and underage sexual assault. Now, the local paper here, within an hour of the verdict, have printed its own special edition here on the streets within an hour of the verdict, and they've also put together some special editions here with the background of the Huntley story and the Maxine Carr story. A lot of local interest here. Nigel Lowther is the deputy editor of the paper. Both Huntley and Carr are very much associated with Grimsby, aren't they?
That's right. Born at Grimsby Maternity Hospital, lived in the towns, went to schools in the towns, worked in the towns, and knew an awful lot of people.
And there's an awful lot of interest here in their activities and in them. People knew them, they were around town a lot, they were seen around town.
Yes, because of, particularly with Huntley, with the number of workplaces that he had, the number of homes, the number of schools, he was known to an awful lot of people in the town.
Just tell us a bit about today for you. You've got the special edition out on the streets. You also broke the news, I understand, of the verdicts to Maxine Carr's mother.
That's right. I called her on a mobile phone the moment we knew of the verdicts, and she was out shopping. We were presuming Freshney Place behind us, and she just said to me that was what we was expecting anyway.
So everybody waiting here then for the news this morning. You've produced these special editions with a lot of background information on both Carr and Huntley. Just give me a picture of Ian Huntley first of all, if you can. You've got everything here from his birth certificate onwards. Just sketch an outline of the man.
Well, the man is somebody who's obviously the main focus will be that he's escaped the attentions of the law on a number of occasions. So there's a man who was charged with rape in this town in 1998, who has assaulted a 12-year-old girl, committed a burglary that was allowed to lie on file eventually. The that was 18 months getting to court, and just any one of those offences clearly he would not have got the job in Soham if he'd been convicted.
And in fact, we all know now that these were offences and so on which were not passed on to Soham Village College, but a quick look through your past editions, in fact, shows many of these offences were reported.
Absolutely. Within seconds of being given the name Ian Huntley at the time of his arrest, we were able to go into our electronic archive, and there was Huntley appearing in Grimsby Magistrates Courts charged with this rape in 1998.
Just tell me, Maxine Carr's family are still here. You just said her mother is still around town.
Yes.
She may well be out of prison if she's allowed, for example, to use an electronic tag within, say, a month's time, between a month and 5 months. Do you expect her to come back here? Do you think, what sort of reception would she have?
Well, it's difficult for me to say and speak on behalf of Maxine Carr or her family. There's obviously an awful lot of interest in the town. Her picture has been all over our newspaper as it has been other news media. I would guess it would be very, very difficult for her to come back here, but who's to say?
You've spoken over the course of your research to friends of both Huntley and Carr, to school friends, people they knew. What have they had to say?
Well, they've talked of particularly Huntley, a man who bullied girlfriends, who had many relationships with girls under the age of 16, and there's people talking in those supplements about strings of girls going into houses that he lived in Grimsby, and they're saying a man who was a loner, who didn't associate with men very easily, is very much wanted to be associated with women, but I say women that he would prey on in pubs, young girls that he would meet, and completely dominate them.
Do you think that this is going to affect Grimsby? Will the town recover from it, or will it, do you think, always be associated with Huntley and Carr?
Well, I would hope it wouldn't be. This is a very pleasant place in which to live, and we have a very good quality of life. I mean, the people of Grimsby, their first thoughts will be with those families in Soham, and that's what we mustn't forget in all this, that there's a real tragedy here. And I'm sure Grimsby will recover.
All right, thank you very much. So a bit more detail then being fleshed out here about the backgrounds of both Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr, and questions also being asked here. Some answers possibly will be provided a little later on this afternoon when Humberside Police down the road from here in Hull will give a press conference, and some of the answers then may be put.
Judith, thank you very much indeed.
Just in case you are joining us this afternoon, the news that Ian Huntley has been convicted and found guilty of the double murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. He's received 2 life sentences. Maxine Carr has been found guilty and given 3.5 years for conspiring to pervert the course of justice, and not guilty of assisting an offender.
Yeah, and it was a dramatic morning in court. First of all, the jury came back to say, we don't think we can reach a unanimous decision, but we may be able to reach a majority one. Mr. Justice Moses sent them out then, and they were able then to go back into court an hour later to deliver those verdicts with a majority of 11-1. And this is what Mr. Justice Moses said of Ian Huntley. In your lies and manipulation, you have increased the suffering of these 2 families.
Tim Albin-Jones, you remember the vicar of Soham, of much comfort to the whole community during the period, has said there will be vast relief in Soham that this is all over.
Well, one of the things most shocking about the case is the lack of information that Cambridgeshire Police, the school, had about Ian Huntley. And David Blunkett, the Home Secretary, has said, this has been a shocking and horrific case, and my thoughts are with Holly and Jessica's families, and we'll be hearing more from him, I should imagine, throughout the afternoon.
And he's also said that real concerns exist about the way in which police intelligence about Huntley's past was handled. This is David Blunkett talking again. He said, I am determined that we should uncover the full facts.
Well, after the court case, we then heard from Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Stevenson from Cambridgeshire Police. There had been criticism that perhaps Cambridgeshire Police hadn't done enough, but they did in the end bring forward the conviction, obviously to their relief. And he said Ian Huntley had carried out one of the most wicked crimes imaginable.
And Marion Baston from the Crime Prosecution Service said there was ultimate cooperation between the CPS and the police, which led eventually to today. He said Huntley's final story was no more than a tissue of lies to save his own skin. That's from Marion Baston from the Crime Prosecution Service. I'm joined from Westminster by Mike Haynes. He's a former head of the paedophile unit at Scotland Yard. He's now a child protection officer. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, with the information we've heard today since the trial about Huntley's background, were there things there that should have rung alarm bells had these pieces of information been put together?
Well, what happens when somebody applies for a job which brings them into close contact and unsupervised access with children is that checks are made with the police force, or police forces actually, where a person has lived, certainly over the past 5 years. And this should have taken place, and in fact we're told did take place of a sorts when Huntley applied for the job as caretaker. The police service in Cambridgeshire would have got in touch with Humberside to ask them whether they knew anything about him. Quite apart from any convictions, all forces have obviously a lot of soft information, intelligence information about whether or not somebody has had allegations made against them in the past. And it's perfectly acceptable and proper for that information to be passed across forces. It's done at very senior level, at Assistant Chief Constable level, who reviews the information that Humberside would have had. He will then contact his opposite number in Cambridgeshire by letter, and then the local education authority would have been told of police concerns formally. Huntley wouldn't have been told about this, but nonetheless there are safeguards because, as I say, because it's held at Assistant Chief Officer level. But nonetheless, this information was there, people knew about it, and it should have gone across to Cambridgeshire. And clearly the man wouldn't have got a job had that information been available.
So some sort of hole in the system there, whoever's fault it is, but fault, let's not lay blame at this point. Something needs to be done to coordinate this information, because surely if it happens in this case, people all over the country must be saying, is that the same nationwide?
Well, that may well be the case, you see, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of checks done on people every year, and so police forces become rather overwhelmed with the amount of work involved. And information lies in different places. So information about, should we say, an allegation in Grimsby might be held in one division, and then he might have just gone a few miles up the road, had an allegation made against him there, and the information would have been held there. I don't know whether Humberside have a central pool of intelligence, but there is a centre of intelligence in the country, and that's the National Criminal Intelligence Service, and there is a paedophile index there, and that holds information about people who have been convicted and also about people who haven't been convicted. But any intelligence system is only as good as the information that's put on it. And so what needs to be done is for the police forces to make sure that all intelligence goes to the centre and it's assessed properly.
Just looking at Neil Dixon's exclusive report for the BBC earlier, it seems incredible that so many people, so many social services would have been alerted, not just the police forces, the social services in many occasions alerted, especially with his relationship with young girls. It does seem incredible that this wasn't picked up anywhere.
It should have been picked up. I mean, this is a glaring one. You might get a situation where perhaps somebody has one allegation made against them where maybe it was false or not, and then there can be discussion about it. But when you've got so many concerns which have been shared in the past between the police service, social services, probation, education, then this forms a body of intelligence and information that was so startling that it should have been passed on to Cambridgeshire and to the Director of Education for Cambridgeshire. And actually, had I been a senior police officer in Cambridgeshire, knowing about this information, forget the murder for a moment, knowing about this information, I would have targeted him anyway and put him under surveillance, because it's quite clear that he was a serial sex offender. He didn't just suddenly murder somebody. He is a serial sex offender, he's a predatory paedophile, and as we now know, he's a serial killer, although he's only killed twice to our knowledge, but who's to say what he's been doing in the past? Okay. What don't we know?
Okay, very briefly, what would you suggest would be the way forward from here? There are going to be inquiries into this, of course, but what would be the safeguards that could be put in place so that parents can feel that their children would be safe?
Well, I think there's no short answer to that, because there are a number of things that you have to do when you're vetting people. Clearly, the use of intelligence and information of this sort is valuable, but also there are other things like the way in which you interview people and whether or not you use personality profiling, which I think we ought to start using. Because again, if a personality profile had been done on this man, the fact that he is a psychopath, a sociopath, would have shown up.
Mike Haynes, thank you very much indeed for joining us with that.
Let me tell you about what's coming up in a few moments' time, because Cambridge Police are about to give a news conference where the families of Holly and Jessica are going to be present at that, and of course we'll bring you that live here on News 24 as soon as they take their seats, and you can see journalists gathering and getting all those microphones lined up on the table there against the backdrop of Cambridgeshire Constabulary, and of course intense interest in that news conference, probably the only time that the families are going to speak. We heard from the Old Bailey itself that they hugged each other when the verdicts were read out, when Ian Huntley was found guilty of murder and Maxine Carr was found guilty of perverting the course of justice. They of course have been in court every day, a terrible ordeal for them to have to relive the moments of when their daughters disappeared in August last year.
We heard the judge today praising the parents for their demeanour in court, something that must have been incredibly difficult. We've heard throughout, of course we didn't see inside the court, but we've heard from our correspondents throughout that they've maintained a calm presence, not showing any emotion. Even today, when those verdicts were read out, they remained stoic and calm. The judge had asked for silence in the court while it was happening, and that's what happened. And only afterwards did they then, we're told, hug each other and give each other comfort. It's been a dreadful time since the deaths of these two little girls for this family, under the media spotlight and of course this trial itself.
Okay, well let's give you another scene as well, which is just outside the Old Bailey. We'd heard originally that it might be Ian Huntley's legal team that would be coming to give some kind of statement to the press. We now understand that it's going to be Maxine Carr's legal representatives. They're due to come and speak in about 15 minutes time, we understand, but of course these timings are very fluid, and obviously a lot going on this afternoon, so we'll also be bringing you that here on News 24 with Maxine Carr's legal team. She of course was found guilty of perverting the course of justice, but was found not guilty on the much more serious charge of assisting an offender. In other words, the court accepted she did not know, she did not believe that Ian Huntley had carried out the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Well, Anthony Ford is the director of the Centre for Crime Investigation at the University of Lincoln, and we can cross to him now because he's in our Lincoln studio. Thanks very much for joining us. Now that the case is over, how did you feel, looking back, that the investigation was conducted?
I think really when you look at the investigation over the period of time, it was pretty normal for most investigations. Any investigation, any murder investigation certainly is an extremely complex thing to deal with. There have been mistakes made. I think the police have already admitted that they have had mistakes made on this inquiry. But generally, I think that overall it's been quite a success for the police, and that's obviously been seen through the conviction today.
What would you say were the mistakes?
Certainly there obviously seems to be a lot of problem on the way they're gathering and sharing information with various agencies and one thing and another, which probably delayed the situation in relation to Huntley for an inordinate amount of time. I think you've obviously had already one speaker on explaining that situation, but it is difficult. If somebody changes their name or changes their details, it's not easy to follow through on these systems. Perhaps sometimes the police get over-reliant on systems and on databases to hopefully root out the people that they're looking for, when really they should go back to their own normal methods of investigation, which is obviously talking to people and checking that information with other human beings rather than databases.
Sure, the problem seemed to be not so much that the information wasn't there. The information was there in plenty about Ian Huntley. It's just that the agencies weren't sharing, weren't pooling information, and there were databases which key people, as our social affairs editor Neil Dixon has revealed, that just weren't getting access to, that they should have been.
That's true, yes, exactly. I mean, that's the whole point of what I was saying, is that there are databases there that they use. The information is out there, but we tend to think in this modern age to rely more on databases and actually talking to people and individuals. Equally, we're restrained by things like Data Protection Act and one thing and another. And I think a lot of people really don't appreciate how to interpret the Data Protection Act and what information they can and can't give to each other. We saw similar situations in relation to incidents prior to September the 11th when the FBI and the CIA all had information about what was going on, but for whatever reasons, whether it was professional competition or because they weren't actually sharing that information, these people went untracked, and basically we had an absolute disaster there.
Yeah.
We have similar situations here again where we need to really look and review what happened in this case, look back at the information and look at how maybe we could share that information and hopefully avert such situations occurring in the future.
Yes, I'm interested that you talk about the FBI and the CIA. Do you think we need more of an FBI type structure, that when you have a massive crime like this, then you pull in the sort of big guns, if you like, just as happens in the United States?
Well, really, I mean, we do have a pretty much a system like that as it is in place now. We have people like the National Crime Faculty, we have experts that are linked into the crime faculty and experts within the police themselves who are all commandeered and brought into these inquiries from an early stage. People like Catcham, the child murder database, and people like that are always involved in these cases from the outset. So there is a national perspective on these cases from the outset, really. It's difficult to say whether having a sort of national police force would make any difference in relation to these inquiries or not. The same mistakes can be made by a national police force as a local police force.
Okay, Anthony Ford in Lincoln, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Now let's just take you to the scene where we're waiting for Cambridgeshire Police to host a press conference for the parents of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. This is the scene there now live. The first time they will have spoken. They've been silent throughout the trial, and now the verdicts have come through and the sentences. They're going to make some short statements. Just to remind you, Ian Huntley found guilty of both the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. He's received a life sentence for each of those murders. His former girlfriend, Maxine Carr, has been found guilty of conspiring to pervert the course of justice, for which she has received a 3.5-year prison sentence. She's been found not guilty of assisting an offender.
And in his summing up, Mr. Justice Moses said of Ian Huntley, "In your lies and manipulation, you have increased the suffering of these two families." Marion Bastin from the Crown Prosecution Service said Huntley's final story was no more than a tissue of lives to save his own skin. Welcome to a special programme from BBC News 24. Ian Huntley has been found guilty of murdering Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman at his home in Surrey.
The former school caretaker was jailed for life. The judge told him these two were happy, intelligent girls, and you murdered them both. You showed no mercy.
His former girlfriend, Maxine Carr, was convicted of perverting the course of justice, but found not guilty of assisting an offender. She's been sentenced to 3.5 years in prison.
Now, within minutes of the end of the trial at the Old Bailey, the Home Secretary announced an independent inquiry into the way in which the police handled intelligence information about Huntley's background. A BBC News investigation has revealed that Huntley had previously faced several allegations of rape and child abuse, including claims that he had indecently assaulted an 11-year-old girl.
Well, in this special programme, we'll hear from the parents of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, who are due to give a news conference shortly. This is the scene live in central London, where Cambridgeshire Police are going to host this news conference on behalf of the Chapmans and Wells family.
The first time, really, we will have heard the families speak throughout this. The judge praising them today for holding their emotions throughout the trial, for their demeanour throughout the trial. The only thing we had from court today was they hugged each other after the verdicts came through.
Well, Cambridgeshire Police gave their reaction to the verdict shortly after sentencing had taken place at the Old Bailey.
Ian Huntley is a dangerous man. He is a calculating and callous child killer. Only he knows why he murdered Jessica and Holly. Perhaps one day he might demonstrate some sliver of humanity and explain why he did what he did that terrible day last August.
So just what was known about Ian Huntley's past? In a special investigation, our social affairs editor Neil Dixon has uncovered exclusive details about Huntley. Details known to Humberside Police, but not acted upon.
When he arrived, the new school caretaker seemed a decent type, with an unblemished past and a stable girlfriend. But back in Grimsby, Huntley's hometown, it was a very different story. Now, a trawl through back copies of the local paper reveals that Ian Huntley was not what he seemed. This is May 18th, 1998, girl in rape horror. A Grimsby girl was attacked and raped in an isolated alley after a night out with friends. Now, just 4 days later, man faces rape charge. Ian Kevin Huntley, 24, of Veal Street, Grimsby, was arrested after an alleged incident in Gas Alley. And there was much more to Huntley's past. In 1995, police investigated claims he was having sex with a 15-year-old. No action was taken. In March 1996, he was charged with burglary. The case collapsed. And in March, April and May, social services looked into 3 more claims he was having sex with underage girls. No action was taken against Huntley. In 1998, 2 women came forward to say he had raped them. Both cases were dropped. And an 11-year-old said Huntley had indecently assaulted her. Once more, there was no action against him. And in 1999, yet another accusation of rape. Again, police concluded there was not enough evidence. So apart from the rape in this alley and the burglary, Huntley had got away without even being charged and with no convictions. The authorities seemed to be organisations without memory. There were 5 separate complaints about Huntley having sex with or abusing young girls on social services files. Not once did council staff link these cases together.
Is it possible, I mean just possible, that if some connection had been made by your staff that Huntley might have been stopped earlier than he was?
You've got to remember, Huntley was never convicted of any crime. And clearly there were investigations into alleged crime that Huntley was involved with, but there were decisions that were taken not to proceed with those cases for various reasons. Those were decisions that the police took.
So here we have a man living in this one town who's been accused of rape by 3 separate women, and who on numerous occasions has been accused of having sex with underage girls. He is clearly a menace. So how on earth was he appointed as a school caretaker? This is his application for the SOAM job. Note that he's changed his name to Ian Nixon. But like anyone wanting to work with children, he also had to fill in a police checks form. And on this, he did admit his previous surname was Huntley. The form was sent here to Cambridgeshire Police. Their job was first to check the police national computer. But they only checked under the name Nixon. They did not check under Huntley. If they had, the burglary charge held on file would have appeared. The head teacher at Surm Village College who took on Ian Huntley is clear. If he'd been told what was on the national computer, it would have made a difference. Had Cambridgeshire Police told you that there was a burglary charge on file for Ian Huntley, what would you have done?
He'd have been dismissed. There'd be no doubt at all about that, for a variety of reasons. First of all, any staff would be looked at very carefully with that information. But we're talking here about a member of staff whose first line in his job description is site security.
Well, let's go live now to central London, because the Wells and the Chapman family are about to give a news conference and their response to today's events.
Thank yous first. Basically to the Homes team, the people of Surham. It goes without saying our FLOs. To all the family and to all the witnesses and to the media. Without their coverage, possibly couldn't have got the right result. If you want to say any more, Kevin.
Thank you, Les. I'm probably going to reiterate some of those thank yous, but we'd like to do just that. We have many people to thank from our community, our friends and family, extended and close, who have been there for us over the last 16 months. Certainly, a more broader thank you to the Cambridgeshire Constabulary, to the media. A question we have been asked many times is the level of intrusion that we've had to experience over the last 16 months, and that has been minimal, so that's a big thank you very much to all of you guys.
Yeah.
Equally, We would also like to just extend that thanks to Cambridgeshire Constabulary a little further. We have some amazing family liaison officers who've been our link to the organisation throughout, and certainly they've made this particular journey a wee bit bearable. So here's an opportunity to at least extend a thank you to them in the most public fashion. The disadvantage now perhaps of thanks across this table with the way that my stomach feels at this moment in time is that I'm going to miss people out. So that will be the end of that. For this moment. Thank you.
The other person I think we'd like to thank is Mr. Moses. Judge Moses, I think his speech caught us all on the hop, which went down, I think, remarkably well from the family's point of view. I think that's about it, really. I suppose it's over to you chaps now.
Kevin, BBC News, could I ask you what went through your mind when you heard the verdict delivered?
A great sense of relief. There was certainly no sense of euphoria, just a relief that we'd got to the end of that process. Thank you.
Rachel Lambert from Sky News. If I could ask Leslie and Sharon Chapman to answer this question. Despite everything you've been through the past 6 weeks of this case, you still don't know what happened to your daughters inside number 5 College Place. How does that leave you feeling?
There's only one man who can answer that question, and whether he has the guts to answer that question publicly is down to him. But the other people we should thank is the 12 jury members who've had to endure what we've had to endure, and without them we wouldn't have got the right result.
And what would it mean to you if Ian Huntley did finally choose to tell you what happened to your daughters, if I could ask the Wells that question?
Well, I don't think we'd give too much credibility to many sentences that he uttered, so we won't be looking for a defining answer from that area.
What do you feel towards Ian Huntley?
Did you ever have any doubts about the outcome of the trial?
So we've had doubts for 16 months to get a satisfactory conclusion. It's a new process for us to be involved in, and not until that verdict was announced today have we had a cessation of our fears.
James McKillop, the Herald Glasgow. What was your reaction when you heard of the previous history of Huntley?
So who was that question to?
James McKillop, the Herald.
I think it was a time bomb just ready to go off, and unfortunately our girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I don't think there's any more need to be said about him, except the only thing that I'd like to say is that the next time I have to see him is like we saw our daughters, and that's in a coffin.
Just further to that remark, Paul Cullen Daily Express, in the light of your last remark, do you lament the fact that the legislature no longer provides for a death penalty?
Sorry, I can't hear that question.